The wedding dress hung untouched on the closet door, 3 days before the ceremony, when Naomi Carter heard her mother scream a single word from downstairs. Out. By the time Naomi reached the bottom of the stairs, Malik was already standing in the doorway with his coat half on, his eyes locked on hers instead of her mother's, and in that one look, Kiara Carter finally understood exactly who her daughter had become to the man she was supposed to marry. 3 weeks before that night, none of this existed. 3 weeks before that night, Naomi didn't even know his name. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What turns a man away from the altar and toward the one woman he was never allowed to want? Was it fate, or was it something that had been quietly growing in that house long before Malik Osei ever walked through its front door? And when the truth finally surfaced, who would be left standing? The mother, the daughter, or the love neither of them asked for? Atlanta in late spring smelled like cut grass and rain that hadn't fallen yet. Kiara Carter had built a life for herself and her daughter out of nothing but grit, a nursing career, a modest brick house on a quiet street, and a stubborn refusal to let anyone see her cry. She'd raised Naomi alone since the girl was 7, since the father who promised forever disappeared into a city none of them ever spoke of again. For 17 years, it had been just the two of them, mother and daughter, learning to trust the world again one small mercy at a time. Naomi was 26 now. She'd inherited her mother's sharp cheekbones and her stubborn silence, but not her mother's caution. Where Kiara moved through life carefully, checking the depth of the water before she stepped in, Naomi dove. She was a freelance graphic designer, the kind of woman who filled sketchbooks with faces of strangers she'd never speak to, who believed, quietly, privately, that love was supposed to feel like falling, not like settling. Kiara had stopped believing in falling a long time ago. Which was why, when she met Malik Osei at a hospital fundraiser 8 months earlier, she almost didn't give him her number. He wasn't flashy. He was a structural engineer, 41 years old, widowed 3 years prior, with kind eyes that had clearly cried more tears than they let on. He didn't chase her. He waited. He called when he said he would call, showed up when he said he would show up, and slowly, carefully, he rebuilt something in Kiara that she thought had been buried with her broken heart years ago. By month 6, he met Naomi exactly twice, once at a birthday dinner, once in passing at the grocery store, where he'd helped her carry a case of water to her car, and made her laugh, so hard she nearly dropped it. Neither of them thought anything of it. He was her mother's boyfriend. That was the whole story. That was supposed to be the whole story. Then Kiara got sick. Not dangerously, a bout of pneumonia that put her in the hospital for 8 days and left her weak for a month after. Malik worked long hours, and Kiara refused to be a burden, so it was Naomi who ended up driving to the house every evening to check on her mother, to bring soup, to sit on the porch when the house got too quiet. More often than not, by the time Naomi arrived, Malik was already there. They didn't plan it. Nobody plans the way a shared worry turns into a shared laugh, or the way a laugh turns into a silence neither person wants to break. For 3 weeks, while Kiara slept off her fevers upstairs, Naomi and Malik sat on that porch swing talking about everything and nothing. His late wife, her absent father, the particular loneliness of loving someone who couldn't fully see you. He told her things he hadn't told her mother. She told him things she'd never told anyone. Neither of them said it out loud. Not yet. But something had shifted, quiet and dangerous, as a tide pulling out before a wave nobody sees coming. The engagement happened 2 months after Kiara recovered. Malik proposed at the same restaurant where they'd had their first date, down on one knee in front of strangers who clapped and cheered, and Kiara cried the kind of tears that come from a woman who fought hard for a happiness she wasn't sure she deserved. Naomi stood beside her mother that night, hugging Malik with a smile stretched so tight across her face it ached, whispering congratulations into his ear while something in her chest quietly cracked down the middle. She told herself it would pass. She told herself it was nothing. A misplaced feeling born out of loneliness and too many nights on that porch swing. She threw herself into wedding planning, into being the perfect daughter, into pretending. But pretending has a shelf life, and hers ran out on a rainy Tuesday night, 6 weeks before the wedding, when her mother called in a panic from a work conference 3 states away and asked her to run to the house and shut the windows before the storm hit. Malik was already there. He always seemed to be there. The house was dark except for the porch light when Naomi pulled into the driveway, rain hammering the windshield so hard she could barely see the front steps. She ran inside soaked to the bone and found him standing in the living room, staring at an old photograph on the mantel. Kiara, 20 years younger, holding a baby that was unmistakably Naomi. She was so happy in this picture, Malik said quietly, not turning around. I want to make her that happy again. You will, Naomi said, though her voice cracked in a way she hoped he didn't notice. He turned around. For the first time in 8 months, neither of them looked away. Naomi, he said, and something in the way he said her name, like it cost him something, made her chest go tight. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. She should have stopped him. She has replayed that moment 1,000 times since, wondering what would have happened if she'd simply walked out of the room. Instead, she stood there, dripping rainwater onto her mother's hardwood floor, and waited. Do you feel it too? He asked. Whatever this is. Tell me I'm not losing my mind. The silence that followed lasted only 4 seconds, but Naomi would later swear it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff for an hour, watching the ground crumble beneath her feet, deciding whether to jump or step back. She didn't answer with words. She answered by not moving when he crossed the room. She answered by letting him take her hand. And that's when she realized this wasn't a storm passing through. It was a storm that had been building inside both of them for months, and there was no shutting the windows against it now. For 2 weeks after that night, Malik and Naomi didn't speak. Not because the feeling had faded, if anything it had grown teeth, but because both of them understood, with a clarity that made them sick to their stomachs, exactly what they were standing on the edge of. Kiara had raised Naomi to believe that loyalty was the one unbreakable rule of family. And Malik had spent 3 years rebuilding a heart that grief had shattered, only to hand a piece of it to the one woman on earth who could destroy everything Kiara had left. Naomi buried herself in work, taking on more freelance clients than she could handle, staying up until 3 and 4 in the morning just so exhaustion would drown out the thoughts. She stopped answering her mother's calls with her usual warmth, offering clipped, guilty responses instead. Kiara noticed. Mothers always notice. Is something wrong between you and Malik? Kiara asked one Sunday, over a dinner Naomi had barely touched. You've been distant since the storm. Did he say something to upset you? Naomi's fork froze halfway to her mouth. No, Mama. I've just been swamped with work. Kiara studied her daughter's face the way only a mother can, reading the things left unsaid beneath the things that were. But grief and hope are powerful blinders, and Kiara wanted this wedding, this new chapter, this proof that she hadn't wasted her whole life waiting for a love that would finally stay. So she let it go. She chose not to see what some part of her already suspected. That's the tragedy nobody talks about. How the people closest to us sometimes hand us the truth without knowing it, and we're too afraid or too hopeful or too tired to pick it up. Malik reached out first. A text, late on a Thursday night. I can't stop thinking about you. I hate myself for it, but I can't. Asterisk. Naomi stared at that message for 11 minutes before she replied. We can't do this. She loves you. She's my mother. I know, he wrote back. I know exactly what this is. I've tried to talk myself out of it every single day. I keep telling myself it's just fear of the wedding, fear of commitment again after it ease. But it's not that, Naomi. I know the difference. I buried a wife. I know what real love feels like, and what I feel for your mother isn't what I feel when I'm near you. She read that message so many times the words started to blur. Then she deleted the entire conversation, turned off her phone, and cried until her body ached, grieving something she'd never even had the chance to hold. The wedding planning continued, because life doesn't pause for the inconvenience of a broken heart. Kiara dragged Naomi along to cake tastings and dress fittings, oblivious to the way her daughter's hands trembled every time Malik's name came up. Naomi smiled through it. She stood in bridal boutiques holding up veils for a wedding she prayed would somehow never happen, hating herself for the prayer, hating herself more for meaning it. Malik, for his part, tried to do the right thing. He threw himself into wedding preparations with a determination that looked, to everyone but Naomi, like devotion. He picked out a tuxedo. He wrote his vows. He told himself, over and over, that once he stood at that altar and said, I do, the feeling for Naomi would fade into what it should have always been, nothing more than affection for the daughter of the woman he loved. But 4 days before the wedding, everything cracked open. It happened at the final dress fitting. Kiara stepped out of the fitting room in her gown, and the boutique fell into the kind of hush reserved for moments people remember for the rest of their lives. She looked radiant, genuinely, achingly beautiful, the kind of happy that made even strangers in the shop smile. Naomi felt her throat close with love for her mother and guilt so heavy it nearly buckled her knees. Then Kiara turned to the boutique attendant and said the words that changed everything. "Actually," she said quietly, almost to herself, "can we hold off on the final alterations? I need to talk to Malik about something first." Naomi's stomach dropped. "Mama, is everything okay?" Kiara's eyes met her daughter's in the mirror, and for a long, terrible moment, Naomi was certain her mother knew that somehow, someway, the secret she and Malik had buried under weeks of silence and guilt had surfaced without either of them saying a single word. But what Kiara said next was not what Naomi expected at all. "I need to tell you something," Kiara said, sitting down slowly on the fitting room bench, still in her wedding gown, looking suddenly very small and very human. "I've been having doubts, Naomi. Not about loving Malik, I do love him, but about whether I'm marrying him because I love who he is, or because I'm terrified of being alone again." Naomi sat frozen, her heart pounding so loud she was sure her mother could hear it. "There's someone else," Kiara continued, her voice trembling now. Not another man. Myself. I've been talking to a therapist for the last 2 months, Naomi, about your father, about the version of myself I lost when he left. I realized I've spent 17 years trying to fill a hole with the first steady thing that came along, and Malik is steady, and he is good, but I don't know if what I feel for him is love or relief. The room went so quiet Naomi could hear her own pulse in her ears. "I haven't told him yet," Kiara whispered. "I don't know how." That night was the emotional peak of everything, the moment 3 lives finally collided with nowhere left to hide. Naomi drove to Malik's apartment, her hands shaking on the steering wheel the entire way, rehearsing words that dissolved the second he opened the door. "She has doubts," Naomi blurted out before he could even say hello. "About the wedding. About you too. She told me tonight." Malik stood in his doorway, stunned into silence, searching Naomi's face for something. Relief, maybe, or permission, or absolution. "What kind of doubts?" "She said she doesn't know if she loves you or just needed you," Naomi said, her voice breaking. "She's been seeing a therapist. She's been carrying this for weeks and didn't know how to say it." Malik ran a hand over his face, and when he looked back up at Naomi, something in his expression had shifted. Not joy, not relief, but a kind of exhausted clarity, like a man finally putting down a weight he'd been carrying for far too long. "I can't marry her, Naomi," he said, the words tumbling out like they'd been dammed up for weeks. "Not now. Not after this. Not when every single day I've been standing next to her, planning a life with her, and thinking about you." "Don't," Naomi whispered, tears sliding freely down her face now. "Don't say it like that. She's my mother, Malik. Whatever this is between us, it can't be worth destroying her." "I'm not asking you to destroy her," he said, stepping closer. "I'm asking you to stop pretending you don't feel what I feel. I've spent 3 years grieving a woman I loved with everything I had. I thought I'd never feel anything close to that again. Then I met your mother, and I thought, maybe this is enough. Maybe steady and kind is enough for a man who buried his first love. And it almost was Naomi. Until you." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and terrifying and finally spoken. "What do we do now?" Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The only thing we can do," Malik said. "We tell her the truth. All of it. Because whatever happens next, she deserves better than a marriage built on a secret." 3 nights later, in the Carter living room, Naomi told her mother everything. The porch swing, the storm, the text messages, the months of silence. Kiara listened without a single interruption, her face unreadable, her hands folded so tightly in her lap her knuckles went pale. When Naomi finished, the silence stretched so long that Naomi began to wonder if her mother would ever speak again. Then Kiara stood, walked to the front door, opened it, and turned to Malik, who had been waiting outside as agreed, to face her once Naomi told the truth first. "Out," she said. One word. Steady. Final. Malik stepped inside anyway, his coat half on from the cold, and for one unbearable second his eyes went not to Kiara, but to Naomi, checking on her, protecting her, the way a man does for someone he can no longer pretend not to love. Kiara saw it. Of course she saw it. That single look told her more than 3 months of silence ever could. "I'm not angry that you fell in love," Kiara finally said, her voice thick but steady, looking between the two of them. "I'm angry that you both let me keep planning a wedding while you carried this alone. Do you have any idea what that made me? A woman standing at the altar of her own life, and I was the last to know it was already over." "I'm sorry, Mama," Naomi wept. "I didn't know how to tell you without breaking you." You didn't break me, Kiara said, and something in her voice, exhausted but unmistakably free, surprised even her. You know what breaks a person? Spending your whole life scared of being alone and marrying a good man for the wrong reasons, just so you never have to find out if you can stand on your own 2 feet. I've been sitting with a therapist for 2 months, Naomi, wondering the same thing about myself. Wondering if I ever really chose Malik, or if I just chose not alone. This didn't break that open. It just finished the job I was already too afraid to do. She looked at Malik. You should have come to me the day you knew. Not 4 days before my wedding dress got its final fitting. You're right, Malik said quietly. I was a coward. I kept telling myself it would fade if I just held on long enough to the version of this that made sense. I'm sorry, Kiara. You deserved a man who was honest with you from the first week, not the last one. The wedding was called off 2 days later, not with rage, but with a hard-won honesty none of them had access to 3 weeks earlier. Kiara returned to therapy, this time not to process the husband who left her, but to understand why she'd spent 17 years building a life around never being left again, instead of a life around being truly known. Slowly, on her own terms, she began dating again, no longer running from a silence, but no longer afraid of it either. Malik and Naomi did not rush into anything. The wound was too fresh, the guilt too heavy for either of them to pretend love alone could smooth it over. They stayed apart for nearly a year, giving Kiara the space to heal without her daughter's happiness rubbed raw in front of her every Sunday dinner. When Malik and Naomi finally did come together quietly, without fanfare, it was with Kiara's blessing, hard-earned, imperfect but real. I used to think love was supposed to feel like falling, Naomi would say, months later, sitting on that same porch swing, where it had all begun. Now, I know the love worth keeping doesn't ask you to fall. It asks you to be honest, even when honesty costs you everything you thought you wanted. And that's when she understood, not every loss is the end. Some are the beginning of something greater. What would you have done in Naomi's place? Do you believe some loves are simply not meant to be hidden, or do you think some secrets should stay buried forever? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more timeless stories that will touch your heart and keep you thinking long after the video ends.